The royal cub did not crawl into Evelyn Harper's lap because he was weak. He crawled there because every dangerous wolf in the room was afraid of the wrong person. The throne infirmary went silent so suddenly that Evelyn could hear water dripping from the rag in her hand onto the polished white stone beneath her knees. One moment, she had been scrubbing the floor like every Packless Omega was expected to do, head lowered, shoulders tucked in, pretending she did not feel the weight of every royal stare pressing her smaller and smaller into the cold. The next, Prince Noah Blackwood, the Alpha King's only son, slipped away from 3 royal healers and crossed the room toward her with one bandaged leg held carefully above the floor. He was in cub form, all pale fur, trembling breaths, and frightened golden eyes far too old for a child. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered that she should not move. Counselor Graham Pike stepped forward, his polished boot knocking against Evelyn's bucket hard enough to spill cloudy water across her skirt. "Keep your hands where we can see them, Stray," he said, his voice smooth with disgust. "Packless things do not touch royal blood." Evelyn froze. Her fingers tightened around the rag, damp and cold against her palm. She knew the law. Everyone in the Northern Territories knew the law. A Packless Omega had no claim, no protection, no voice unless someone powerful chose to lend her one. And no one had ever chosen Evelyn Harper. Not when her old pack turned its back on her. Not when the palace took her in as floor staff instead of letting her sleep outside the gates. Not when the council laughed at the faded collar marks beneath her dress sleeves and called her a wolf with no wolf left inside. But Noah did not care about the law. The injured cub reached her, sniffed once at the air around her, and lowered his head into her lap as if he had been searching for her all his life. A soft, broken sound left his throat, not a growl, not a cry, something lonelier than both. Evelyn's breath caught behind her ribs. She did not lift her hands at first. She was too aware of the guards with their spears, the healers with their shocked faces. Vanessa Reed watching from beside the royal chair with her perfect blonde hair and perfect Luna candidate smile, turning sharp at the edges. Then Noah shivered against her. That was all it took. Slowly, carefully, Evelyn laid one hand over his small shoulders. "It's okay," she whispered, so low only the child should have heard. "No one is taking you while you're scared." The cub's trembling eased. The room seemed to forget how to breathe. Then the doors opened. Alpha King Caleb Blackwood entered like winter given a crown, tall and silent in a black coat dusted with snow, his dark hair wind-tossed, his amber eyes locked on his son. Power moved with him, not loud, not uncontrolled, but deep enough to make every alpha in the room lower their gaze. Evelyn felt it in her bones, a pressure that told every living thing to yield. Caleb saw Noah in her lap. He saw Evelyn's hand on his son. His expression did not change, but the air turned colder. "Step away from the prince," he ordered. Evelyn tried. She truly did. Her hand lifted. Her body leaned back. But Noah snapped awake with a startled sound and pressed himself harder against her knees. Caleb crossed the room in 3 measured steps and reached for his child. Before his fingers could touch Evelyn's sleeve, Noah turned and gave a warning growl to his own father. The sound was small, frightened, and absolute. The Alpha King stopped. No one moved. Vanessa's smile vanished. Counselor Graham's face drained of color. Evelyn stared at the cub protecting her from the most powerful wolf in America, unable to understand why a royal child who had never met her would choose her lap over his father's arms. Caleb's gaze dropped from Noah's bared little teeth to Evelyn's pale, trembling face, then to the places where old hurt had taught her body to flinch before a hand ever landed. Something flickered in his eyes, fast and dangerous. Not anger at her. Recognition. "What did you do to my son?" he asked, his voice quiet enough to be terrifying. Evelyn swallowed, feeling Noah's warm weight settle deeper against her as if answering for her. "Nothing, Your Majesty," she whispered. "I think he just knows what it feels like to be afraid." In a room full of people who keep calling it obedience. The words left Evelyn before she could soften them, and for one terrible second, she thought the Alpha King would have her dragged from the room for saying what no one else dared to name. Instead, Caleb Blackwood only stared at her, still as a blade beneath ice. His son remained pressed against her knees, little claws caught in the damp fabric of her gray work dress, his breath quick and shallow against her wrist. Evelyn could feel each inhale stutter through him. It was not rage. It was panic wearing teeth. Around them, the throne infirmary began to move again in nervous fragments. A healer reached for a tray. A guard shifted his spear. Counselor Graham opened his mouth as if the silence belonged to him. Noah flinched at every sound. His ears flattened. His small body tightened until Evelyn feared he would hurt himself trying to become invisible. She did not look at the council. She did not look at Vanessa Reed, whose perfume of roses and expensive smoke curled through the room like a pretty lie. Evelyn looked only at the cub. Too loud, she murmured. I know. Everything is too loud. Caleb's eyes sharpened. Explain. His command rolled through the room, and every wolf's spine bent under it except Evelyn's, because she was already on the floor and because the child in her lap had begun to shake again. She swallowed the fear rising in her throat. Your Majesty, he is not refusing you because he hates you. A low murmur passed through the healers. Vanessa let out a soft, offended laugh. The floor girl is diagnosing the royal heir now. Evelyn's cheeks warmed, but her hand kept moving in slow circles between Noah's shoulder blades. He smells silver on the bandages. He smells fear from the healers. He smells anger from the guards. And every alpha in this room is pushing power into the air because they think control will calm him. Her voice trembled, but it did not break. It is crushing him. No one spoke. Even Graham Pike seemed briefly robbed of his polished cruelty. Caleb turned his head slightly, and the guards behind him pulled their presence back as if a storm had been sealed behind glass. The change was instant. The air loosened. Evelyn could breathe more easily. So could Noah. The cub's trembling softened beneath her palm, and the sharp line of his little spine relaxed one careful inch at a time. Caleb saw it. Evelyn knew he saw it because something in his face shifted, not enough for mercy, not yet, but enough for doubt to enter where certainty had stood. Vanessa stepped closer, her silk gown whispering over the stone. Or perhaps he is responding to manipulation. Omegas have always known how to make weakness look like innocence. Noah lifted his head and gave a small warning sound, not wild this time, but tired, almost pleading. Evelyn bent closer, keeping her voice low enough to feel like a blanket. No teeth now, little wolf. You do not have to scare people just to make them listen. Caleb went utterly still. The words seemed to strike him somewhere beneath the crown, beneath the black coat, beneath the iron discipline that held the kingdom around his shoulders. His amber gaze moved from Evelyn's mouth to Noah's face. The cub blinked up at her, and for the first time since Evelyn had seen him, his eyes were wet but calm. Say that again, Caleb said. Evelyn looked up, confused. I only said he does not have to scare people to be heard. The Alpha King's hand closed slowly at his side. Behind his eyes, some old door had opened, and whatever stood behind it hurt more than anger. His mother used to say that, he whispered. Vanessa's expression faltered. Graham went pale. Evelyn's heart dropped. She had never met the dead Luna. She had never stepped inside the royal wing before that morning. She had no way of knowing the private words of a woman whose portrait hung above the throne. Yet Noah tucked his face into her lap with a soft breath, as if he had been waiting for someone to remember him correctly. Caleb looked at Evelyn then, truly looked at her, and the room changed around that look. She was no longer only a Packless Omega with cold hands and a dirty skirt. She was a question no one in the palace knew how to answer. Caleb ordered the throne infirmary cleared with a single glance, and the room emptied as if the walls themselves had learned. Obedience. Guards withdrew first, then healers, then council members who pretended not to stare as they passed Evelyn on the floor. Vanessa Reed was the last to leave, her pale smile carefully restored, but her eyes stayed on Noah's small body curled against Evelyn's lap like she was watching a door close in her face. When the heavy doors shut, the silence changed. It was no longer public. It was private, sharper, more dangerous. Evelyn sat very still on the cold stone, one hand resting lightly on Noah's back, the other folded in her skirt so Caleb would not think she was reaching for anything. The Alpha King stood a few feet away, tall enough to make the room feel smaller, his black coat hanging from his shoulders like a storm cloud. Dr. Miriam Cole remained near the medicine table, quiet and pale, waiting for permission to breathe. Your name, Caleb said. Evelyn lowered her eyes. Evelyn Harper, Your Majesty. Pack. The word struck harder than it should have. Noah shifted, his nose pressing against her wrist as if he had heard something in her pulse. Evelyn forced air into her lungs. I do not have one. Caleb's jaw tightened. Everyone has a pack. Not everyone is kept by one. The answer was too honest. She knew at the moment it left her mouth. Dr. Cole glanced up in warning, but Evelyn could not take it back. Caleb studied her as if every word was a footprint leading toward a trap. Who taught you the phrase you used with my son? No one. Who sent you into this palace? The winter intake office. I was assigned to laundry first, then floors. Who told you how to calm a royal cub? Evelyn looked down at Noah. His breathing had evened, but his little claws still held the fabric of her skirt with stubborn trust. No one taught me that either. Caleb stepped closer. Noah tensed. Evelyn felt it before anyone saw it. The tiny tightening beneath fur and bandage. The fear returning like cold water under a door. Then why did he choose you? Caleb asked. It was the first question that did not sound like an accusation. It sounded worse. It sounded like a father asking the world why it had hidden something he desperately needed. Evelyn swallowed. Maybe. Because I did not try to make him brave before I made him feel safe. Caleb's eyes darkened, not with anger, but with something that had no easy name. Do you understand what this looks like? He asked quietly. A Packless Omega appears near my son after an attack. He refuses healers, refuses guards, refuses me, but accepts you. You speak words only his mother used. You calm pain-trained healers could not calm. You expect me to call that coincidence? Evelyn's fingers curled into the wet cloth of her skirt. No, Your Majesty. I expect you to be afraid of it. The room stilled. Even Dr. Cole looked at her as if she had stepped onto thin ice and kept walking. Caleb's gaze fixed on her face. Afraid. For him. Evelyn nodded toward Noah. Not of me. For the first time, something almost human crossed his expression, and it vanished so quickly she wondered if she had imagined it. He reached down, not for Noah this time, but for Evelyn's shoulder, careful and controlled, as if he meant only to move her back and prove the child could survive 1 inch of distance. But Noah woke instantly. He lifted his head and caught Caleb's sleeve between his small teeth. Not hard, not cruel, simply certain. The message was clear enough to silence a kingdom. Do not take her. Caleb froze. Evelyn froze with him. The cub looked from father to Omega, trembling again, and made a sound so soft it barely counted as a protest. Caleb slowly released the air in his chest and lowered his hand. As he did, his gaze caught the edge of Evelyn's sleeve where the fabric had slipped back, revealing faint old lines against her pale skin, the kind of history no one wore by choice. The Alpha King's face changed. Not much, just enough for the cold to crack. Who did that to you? He asked. Evelyn pulled the sleeve down, but Noah had already seen Caleb see it. The cub tucked himself tighter against her, and in the royal wing's terrible silence, Evelyn realized the child was not only afraid Caleb would hurt her. He was afraid Caleb would not understand that someone already had. By noon, the royal court had turned Evelyn Harper from a question into a spectacle. Caleb did not want her brought before the council so soon. She saw that in the hard line of his mouth when the summons arrived, saw it in the way his hand paused near Noah, as if he wished he could keep the child hidden from every polished smile and sharpened law in the palace. But the council moved quickly when it smelled uncertainty. They called it protocol. Vanessa Reed called it necessary. Counselor Graham Pike called it protection of the royal bloodline, and every word sounded less like protection and more like a cage being built around a frightened child. Evelyn entered the high court with Noah in her arms because the cub refused to be carried by anyone else. The hall was enormous, all black marble, silver banners, and windows tall enough to trap the winter sky. Dozens of wolves stood along the walls in human form, dressed in dark formal coats and pale gowns, their eyes following the Packless Omega as though she had crossed an invisible border. Evelyn kept her chin lowered, not in surrender, but to keep her cheek against Noah's soft fur. His breathing was uneven again. The room was too bright, too crowded, too full of judgment wearing perfume and gold. Caleb stood at the foot of the throne, not seated on it, and that alone made the council uneasy. A king on his feet was a warning. Graham Pike lifted a thin folder. To determine whether this woman has any lawful standing near the royal heir, we have requested testimony from her former pack. Evelyn's stomach went cold. The doors opened before she could prepare her face. Grant Walker walked in wearing a navy suit, and the same pleasant expression he used years ago whenever he wanted cruelty to look like concern. He was not an alpha. He had never needed to be. Some men learned to wound with paperwork, whispers, and rooms full of people willing to believe them. His gaze found Evelyn, and his smile widened. "Well?" Grant said softly, loud enough for the court to hear. "Little Evie Harper. I wondered where the palace had hidden you." Noah's ears lifted at the name. Evelyn's arms tightened around him, careful not to press on his bandages. Grant bowed to Caleb with perfect respect, then turned to the council. "She was released from our pack because she had no stable wolf, no useful rank, and no reliable loyalty. Her father left debts. Her mother left rumors. Evelyn left nothing at all." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the back of the hall. Vanessa did not laugh. She only watched Caleb to see how the words landed. Evelyn felt each one strike a place she had spent years teaching herself not to touch. No stable wolf. No useful rank. No loyalty. Old labels, polished until they looked official. Caleb's amber gaze moved to her, but she did not look back. If she did, she might break in a way the court would enjoy. Grant stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound intimate, while still feeding every listening ear. "If the prince has chosen her, then perhaps the injury affected his instincts. A royal cub in pain may cling to any warm thing." Noah went utterly still. Evelyn felt it first, the quiet gathering under his small body, not rage, not simple fear, but insulted recognition. He knew when someone was making her smaller. He knew because he knew what it felt like. "Noah," Evelyn whispered, her lips near his ear. "Stay with me. You do not have to answer him." But the court windows trembled. Not loudly, not enough to shatter, just enough for every silver banner to quiver on its pole. Outside, beyond the tall glass and snow-covered courtyard, a single wolf howled. Then another. Then many more, low and distant, answering a prince who had not made a sound. Graham Pike's face paled beneath its careful calm. Grant stopped smiling. Caleb turned slowly toward the windows, and for the first time since Evelyn had entered the court, the Alpha King looked less like a ruler hearing testimony and more like a father realizing his son had been speaking in a language adults had forgotten. Noah lifted his head from Evelyn's shoulder. His golden eyes fixed on Grant Walker, steady, wounded, and far too knowing. Evelyn pressed her hand gently between his shoulders and whispered, "You are safe." The cub did not look away from Grant. He only leaned back into Evelyn's touch, and outside, the royal wolves howled again. The howling did not stop until Caleb ended the hearing with a voice so quiet that even the oldest counselors obeyed before they remembered to object. By sunset, Evelyn was taken to a small servant chamber outside the royal wing instead of the lower staff quarters, close enough for Noah to send her through the walls, far enough for the council to pretend rules still mattered. A guard stood outside her door. Another stood at the end of the hall. They called it protection, but Evelyn had lived too long without a pack to mistake a locked hallway for kindness. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed with her hands folded in her lap, still feeling the weight of the cub against her chest, still hearing the wolves answer him from the courtyard. The palace had gone quiet around her, but it was not peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that gathered before a storm found the windows. Somewhere beyond the wall, Noah whimpered. Evelyn lifted her head. The sound was tiny, muffled by stone and distance, yet it moved through her like a thread pulled tight around her ribs. The guard outside shifted. Evelyn stood. "He needs someone," she said. "The royal healer is with him." The guard answered, not unkindly. "Sit down, Miss Harper." Another whimper came, weaker this time. Then a child's voice broke through the corridor, raw with fever and fear. "Evie." The guard went still. Evelyn's knees nearly gave out. No one had called her that with tenderness in years. The door across the hall opened hard enough to strike the wall. Caleb Blackwood stepped out in shirt sleeves, crownless, his dark hair damp as if he had run his hands through it too many times. For the first time, he looked less like the Alpha King and more like a father standing at the edge of losing the only thing keeping his world upright. His eyes found Evelyn. "Come." No council approval. No explanation. Just one word, and the hallway moved for him. Evelyn followed him into Noah's room, where the air was too warm, too bright, and sharp with medicine. Dr. Miriam Cole stood beside the bed with her sleeves rolled up, her face drawn with exhaustion. Bowls of water, clean cloths, and silver-safe instruments lined a nearby table. Noah lay curled on his side beneath a gray blanket, his pale hair damp against his forehead, one small hand clawing weakly at the sheets as if reaching for something he could not see. Evelyn crossed the room before anyone told her not to. Caleb did not stop her. She sat carefully beside the bed and placed her palm near, not on, Noah's hand. "I am here," she whispered. "You found me." Noah's fingers closed around hers with startling strength. His breathing, frantic only moments before, began to slow. Dr. Cole stared as if medicine itself had changed its mind. Caleb stood on the other side of the bed, silent, watching every inch between Evelyn and his son. "His fever rose after court," Dr. Cole said softly. "The silver residue in the wound is reacting again. Nothing is easing it for long." Evelyn barely heard her. Noah's eyes moved behind closed lids, trapped in a dream that hurt him. Without knowing why, she began to hum. The melody came from nowhere and everywhere at once, low and trembling at first, then steadier, like warm light beneath a door. It did not sound like any song from her childhood. It felt older than memory. Noah's grip softened. The tight line of his brow eased. The restless pull of his body against the sheets quieted until only his breathing filled the room. Evelyn kept humming, afraid that if she stopped, the child would slip back into the dark place calling him. When she finally looked up, Caleb's face had lost every trace of color. His hand rested against the bedpost, knuckles pale from restraint. "Where did you learn that song?" he asked. Evelyn shook her head. "I do not know." Dr. Cole covered her mouth, eyes shining with fear and wonder. Caleb looked down at Noah, then back at Evelyn, and his voice fell to a whisper meant for ghosts. That lullaby was sung only by the women of the Royal Luna line. Evelyn's song faltered, but Noah stirred at once, so she forced the melody to continue. Caleb did not move closer. He did not accuse her. He only stood there in the golden lamplight, listening to a Packless Omega sing his air back from the edge with a song she should never have known. The lullaby held until midnight, and then Noah stopped breathing. It happened so quietly that for one impossible second, no one understood the room had changed. The fever had eased, the lamps had been lowered, and Evelyn's voice had softened into a thread of sound barely stronger than a prayer. Noah's small hand rested inside hers, warm and still. Then his fingers loosened. His chest failed to rise. Dr. Miriam Cole moved first, crossing the room with the sudden precision of a woman who had spent her life fighting panic with knowledge. Caleb's chair struck the floor behind him as he stood. The air cracked beneath the force of his fear, every candle flame bending away from him. Evelyn felt the pressure slam into her ribs, but she did not let go of Noah's hand. "Step back," Dr. Cole said, but her voice shook. "The silver residue has reached his heart." Caleb made a sound that was not a word. It was a father breaking inside his own silence. Shadows gathered at his back, deep and restless, the shape of the wolf beneath the man pressing against the room like a storm trapped behind glass. Evelyn should have been terrified. Every instinct she owned told her to move away from the Alpha King's grief before it turned the air unlivable. But Noah's hand was going cold in hers, and terror became useless. "No," Evelyn whispered. She climbed onto the edge of the bed and gathered the child carefully against her chest, mindful of every bandage, every shallow breath that was not there. Dr. Cole reached toward her. "Miss Harper, you cannot draw silver through yourself. It could stop your own heart." Evelyn looked down at Noah's pale face. "Then I will ask it nicely to leave him first." Caleb stared at her as if she had spoken madness, but he did not pull her away. Maybe he saw that Noah's fingers had curled faintly into her sleeve again. Maybe he heard the room listening. Evelyn pressed one palm over the bandage near Noah's shoulder and the other against the center of his back. The lullaby rose from her throat without permission, no longer soft, no longer uncertain. The words were not English. They were older, rounder, shaped like moonlight on stone and wind through pine. Heat bloomed under Evelyn's skin, gentle at first, then bright enough to steal her breath. Silver light threaded from her palms and slipped beneath the bandages, not like fire, not like a weapon, but like dawn finding cracks in a locked room. Noah's body arched once against her arms, then settled. Evelyn tasted cold metal on her tongue. Her hands trembled. "Stay," she breathed against his hair. "You are allowed to stay." Caleb moved closer, then stopped himself, his hands curled at his sides, because for once power could not command what love was begging for. The mark on Evelyn's wrist appeared like frost beneath clear water, a silver crescent circling her pulse. It glowed in time with Noah's faint heartbeat. Dr. Cole whispered something Evelyn could not hear. The shadows behind Caleb recoiled, then bowed. Noah gasped. The sound was small, rough, beautiful. His chest rose. Once, twice, then again, steady enough that the whole room seemed to inhale with him. Evelyn nearly collapsed forward, but Caleb was there before she hit the mattress, one hand hovering near her shoulder without touching until Noah gave a sleepy, fragile whimper and did not protest. Only then did Caleb steady her with the lightest hold, as if she were something sacred and easily lost. Across the room, Dr. Cole stared at Caleb's open collar, where an old scar over his heart had begun to fade beneath the same silver light. Caleb looked down at it, then at Evelyn, his face stripped of crown, command, and disbelief. In the silence that followed, something unseen moved through the room, ancient and certain. Caleb closed his eyes for one breath, and when he opened them, his voice was not the king's voice at all. It was the wolf beneath him, low and shaken. "She is not Packless," he whispered. "She is ours." By morning, the palace no longer whispered that Evelyn Harper had saved the royal heir. It whispered that she had done something impossible, and impossible things frightened people who survived by controlling what everyone else was allowed to believe. Noah slept for the first time without fever, curled beneath a gray blanket with one hand still gripping the edge of Evelyn's sleeve, but the peace in his room was fragile, thin as frost on glass. Caleb stood by the window, watching snow gather on the balcony rail, while Dr. Miriam Cole examined the bandages that had been removed from Noah's shoulder. Evelyn sat beside the bed, drained to the bone, the silver mark around her wrist dim but not gone. She should have been too tired to notice anything. Yet when Dr. Cole placed the used bandage into a porcelain bowl, a sharp scent rose from it, sweet beneath the medicine, almost floral, almost expensive. Evelyn's stomach tightened. She had smelled it before. Not in the infirmary. Not on Noah. On Vanessa Reed's velvet cloak when the Luna candidate leaned close in court, smiling like a candle hiding a blade. Evelyn lifted her head. "That was not only silver," she said. Dr. Cole froze. Caleb turned from the window. "What did you smell?" Evelyn touched the edge of the bowl, careful not to disturb the cloth. "Rose oil. Smoke. Something bitter underneath. It was on Lady Vanessa yesterday." The room changed temperature. Caleb crossed to the table and looked at the bandage, but before he could speak, the doors opened and Counselor Graham Pike entered with 6 royal guards and a folded warrant in his hand. His expression was solemn, polished, and already victorious. "Evelyn Harper," he said, "by order of the High Council, you are to be confined pending investigation into unlawful influence over the royal heir." Noah stirred at the sound of his voice. Evelyn stood too quickly, dizziness washing the room white at the edges. Caleb stepped in front of her. "The High Council does not issue warrants inside my son's chamber without my seal." Graham bowed, but there was no submission in it. Emergency authority applies when the royal bloodline is compromised. The Packless Omega performed undocumented magic on the prince. Witnesses have come forward. Behind him, Vanessa appeared in the hall, pale and perfect, one gloved hand resting at her throat. Beside her stood Grant Walker, his smile gentle enough to fool anyone who had never been left alone with it. "I am sorry, Your Majesty," Grant said, sounding anything but sorry. "Evelyn had a history of unstable abilities in our pack. We feared she had been taught forbidden healing by her father before his disgrace." Evelyn's breath caught. The lie was old enough to wear a familiar shape. Her father had not been dangerous. He had been inconvenient. He had asked questions about missing children, missing records, missing names sealed beneath council wax. Graham lifted the warrant higher. For the prince's safety, she must be removed. Caleb's eyes had gone gold, but he did not move. That was the cruelest part of power. A king could break a door, silence a room, make soldiers kneel, but a council built from laws and fear could wrap chains around mercy and call it duty. Evelyn looked past him to Noah, who was waking now, his small face tightening with confusion. She knew what would happen if he became frightened. She knew the council would use it as proof. so she stepped around Caleb before he could stop her. "I will go quietly," she said. His gaze snapped to hers. "Evelyn." The sound of her name in his voice nearly undid her, but she shook her head once. "He needs to rest more than he needs to watch people fight over me." Graham's guards approached. Caleb's presence darkened the room so completely that even Vanessa took a step back, but Evelyn held his stare and whispered, "Please do not make him choose fear again." The words struck him harder than defiance would have. The guards did not touch her roughly. They did not need to. The sight of Evelyn walking away from the bed was enough to make Noah whimper. By dusk, she sat behind a silver-lined door beneath the eastern wing, hands folded in her lap, the mark on her wrist faint as moonlight underwater. Above her, the palace held its breath. Then came a soft scrape outside the cell. Evelyn lifted her head. On the other side of the narrow door, small fingers appeared beneath the gap, trembling but determined. Noah had crawled out of bed and found her. Noah should not have been able to reach the eastern cells, but children who had spent too long unheard learned how to move through silence better than adults move through halls. Evelyn dropped to her knees on the cold floor and pressed her hand flat against the narrow gap beneath the door, careful not to touch the silver lining. His small fingers found hers from the other side, warm, trembling, stubborn. "Noah," she whispered, her throat tightening around his name. "You have to go back to bed." A soft sound answered her, not a growl, not a word, but a refusal small enough to break her heart. Footsteps thundered down the corridor a moment later. Guards shouted. Someone called for the king. Noah did not pull away. When Caleb Blackwood appeared at the end of the hall, crownless again, his face looked carved from a fear he had no throne strong enough to hide. He saw his son sitting on the stone outside Evelyn's cell in a nightshirt and bare feet, one hand under the door, as if the whole kingdom could be held together by the touch of a Packless Omega. For one long breath, Caleb did not speak. Then he crouched beside Noah, his voice low and careful. "Come here, little wolf." Noah looked at his father. Then he looked at the door. He did not move. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. Evelyn closed her eyes. "Please," she whispered from inside the cell. "Do not make him prove this with his body." Caleb's jaw tightened. He stood, turned to the guards, and said, "Open it." By dawn, the high court was filled from marble floor to vaulted ceiling. The council wanted a public ruling. Vanessa wanted a confession. Graham Pike wanted Evelyn displayed in silver cuffs so the court would see guilt before hearing truth. Caleb allowed the hearing, but he entered with Noah in his arms, and the entire room understood that this time, the prince was not evidence. He was witness. Evelyn was brought forward in a plain gray dress, pale from exhaustion, the silver mark on her wrist hidden beneath the cuff. Graham began with polished words about royal safety, forbidden influence, and unstable Omega gifts. Vanessa lowered her eyes at perfect moments. Grant Walker spoke of old records and family disgrace, turning every lie into a document and every document into a cage. Caleb listened without interruption, but his gaze kept returning to Noah, who had gone very still in his arms. At last, Graham lifted one hand toward Evelyn. "If she has not influenced the heir, let the prince choose freely. Let him come to his father." The court held its breath. Caleb lowered Noah gently to the floor. "Noah," he said, soft enough that only love remained in the command. The child looked at him. For a moment, Evelyn saw how badly Caleb wanted his son to come, not for the council, not for the crown, but because every father wanted to be the safest place his child knew. Noah took one step toward Caleb. Then he turned and crossed the court to Evelyn. No one moved. He climbed into her lap as he had in the infirmary, small hands clutching her sleeves, then placed his palm over the silver cuff at her wrist. Light spread beneath his fingers. Not harsh, not dangerous, gentle as morning through snow. The cuff opened and fell away with a soft sound that echoed through the hall like a bell. The mark on Evelyn's wrist blazed silver, a crescent wrapped around her pulse. Outside, beyond the tall windows, the royal wolves gathered across the courtyard and bowed their heads one by one. Caleb's shadow stretched behind him, the shape of his wolf rising in silent recognition before lowering itself toward Evelyn. Vanessa's face emptied of color. Graham took one step back. Grant forgot how to smile. Noah turned his tear-bright eyes toward his father and spoke clearly enough for every corner of the court to hear. "She saved me. You scared her." The words did not accuse. That made them worse. Caleb looked at Evelyn, at the open cuff, at his son resting against the only person who had listened before demanding obedience. Then the Alpha King turned to his council, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet enough to make the room lean away from its own lies. Then I have been listening to the wrong monsters. The court did not erupt after Caleb spoke. It folded into silence, the kind that came when an old structure realized the ground beneath it had disappeared. Graham Pike stood beneath the silver banners with his warrant still in hand, but the paper looked suddenly weightless. Vanessa Reed reached for her composure and found nothing there. Grant Walker took one careful step toward the doors, only to stop when the royal wolves outside lifted their heads in perfect unison. Caleb did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Counselor Pike, Lady Reed, and Grant Walker will be removed from authority pending a full investigation into the attack on my son, the use of contaminated medical wrappings, and the falsified testimony given in this hall. Graham opened his mouth, but Caleb's gaze cut to him, cold and absolute. You taught this court to fear a girl who saved a child because you needed everyone to stop looking at the hands that harmed him. No one argued after that. Guards escorted the three conspirators away without spectacle, and somehow that quiet was more devastating than any public punishment could have been. Evelyn sat on the marble floor with Noah in her lap, too drained to stand, too stunned to understand why the court now looked at her as if the gray dress, the tired hands, and the old fear in her shoulders had become something sacred. The royal wolves beyond the windows remained bowed. Not to Caleb, to her. Caleb crossed the hall slowly, each step measured, not as a king approaching someone beneath him, but as a father approaching the person his child had trusted before anyone else was wise enough to follow. He stopped several feet away and lowered himself to one knee. A ripple moved through the court. Evelyn's breath caught. Your Majesty, she whispered, but he shook his head. No, Caleb said, his voice rough in a way that made him sound younger than the crown he carried. Not like that. Not today. Noah leaned against Evelyn's chest, watching his father with solemn golden eyes. Caleb looked at his son first. I scared you because I was afraid, he said. That is not an excuse. You deserved a father who listened before he commanded. Noah's small fingers tightened in Evelyn's sleeve, but he did not hide. Caleb then turned to Evelyn. And you deserved a kingdom that saw mercy as strength before a wounded child had to prove it. Evelyn felt the words settle somewhere deep, somewhere old labels had lived for too long. Packless, useless, unwanted. They did not vanish all at once. Healing never worked that way. But for the first time, they sounded less like truth and more like names someone cruel had written on a door she was finally allowed to leave. I do not want revenge, she said quietly. I want him to grow up in rooms where he does not have to growl to be heard. Caleb's eyes softened, and the court seemed to understand that this was not weakness. It was the kind of mercy that could rebuild what fear had ruled. He extended his hand, then stopped before touching her, waiting. The restraint mattered. Evelyn saw it. So did Noah. The cub looked from his father to Evelyn, then placed Caleb's hand gently over hers, as if the choice belonged to all three of them. Warmth moved through Evelyn's wrist, slow and golden beneath the silver crescent mark. Caleb inhaled sharply, not with possession, but recognition. The bond did not snap into place like a chain. It unfolded like dawn, patient and bright after a long winter. Outside, snow began to fall over the courtyard, softening the black stone and silver gates. By evening, Evelyn stood on the palace steps with Noah asleep in her arms, his breathing steady, his small face peaceful against her shoulder. Caleb stood beside her, close enough to shield, not close enough to cage. Below them, the gathered wolves bowed their heads once more, and this time Evelyn did not flinch from being seen. She was still the girl who had scrubbed floors, still the Omega who had been left with